as the global problem set increases, the resources we need to tackle those problems seem to be decreasing. We need to do more with less, and tech seems to offer the solution. But the fit isn't always right. Sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's not knowing the conditions on the ground. Exploring the ways in which we can develop and nurture appropriate technology, the Achieving Exponential Impact panel discussion that you're about to hear asks the question, how can global collaboration and technology innovation help humanity exponentially scale positive impact? On the panel are Samira Khan of Salesforce.org, who are committed to building a better future together and have donated or provided discount technology to the tune of $1 billion in 2020 alone. Federico Marcon from the Global Evergreening Alliance, who are implementing nature-based solutions to capture 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere annually. Trina Leberer, Director of the Nature Conservancy, and that's a 70-year-old organization that is working tirelessly in 79 countries across 6 continents to create a world in which people and nature can thrive in harmony. They're supported by over 1 million members. And Dr. Ian Norton, Founder and Managing Director of Respond Global, which is dedicated to offering health emergency solutions and helping humanity tackle the COVID pandemic. The panel is chaired by Rosie Ween of Wateraid Australia. She is the Chief Executive, and Wateraid Australia to date have positively impacted 54 million people across 28 countries by driving improved hygiene and sanitation through the provision of clean water, toilet and washing facilities.
Thank you, Will, for that wonderful introduction. Rosie Ween from Wateraid Australia here, joining the Together in Action community for this fantastic panel. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I extend that respect to all First Nations and Indigenous people that are joining us. One of the words that I recently learnt in Wurundjeri language is Wominjaka, which I thought meant welcome, but it has a much deeper meaning. It means come with purpose. So I welcome all of you on to this conversation and our panelists and ask you to pause and reflect on your purpose, what it is that you're striving to achieve, and what is the impact that you're seeking to have on people and planet. Samira, it would be wonderful to hear from you. What are some of the challenges that you're working on? I know that you really love that space between social innovation, technology, collaboration to have the biggest impact.
Thank you, Rosie. So as I think about the broader company at which I work, Salesforce, you'll often hear our CEO talk about purpose in terms of using business as a platform for change. So that's bringing all the assets we have to bear as a corporation on social impact, whether that be our technology, as you mentioned, our innovation agenda, our people's time. How do we enable and empower all of our assets, our people, the citizens we touch, our partners, to have social impact and to have social good, or to have a positive impact on society? As we think about .org, which is where I work, it's one of the social impact centers at Salesforce. For us, it's very much rooted in our technology for social change portfolio. So how do we use our customer/constituent relationship management platform for good? And how do we enable our employees to support that pro bono? So that's all more from a company perspective, but I think what really drives me is this notion of empowering the actual individuals by giving them the time, the space, the assets, the networks, the connection, and most of all, by helping them connect better with their own inner passion and their own sense of empathy. So for me, as we think about whether it's the Sustainable Development Goals or social impact in general, it's this notion of how do we do that for all people, help all people better connect with their inner core and help them tell stories about the world in which they live in and place themselves in a context where they feel empowered to do better for themselves, for their family, for their local communities, and the broader sort of society. So I'm really trying to reach the hardest to reach populations to the extent possible in my day-to-day job, as well as in my personal job, as well as in my personal life. The only thing I'll add is, you know, when I was younger, I really sort of believed in dreams. And so now that I've gotten older, I don't believe that in them in the same way. I'm not as spiritual in that way, but I do try to, when I can, pause and silence myself and listen, which is often difficult to do in a corporate environment, even when you're working on social impact.
Amazing. Let's go to you, Federico.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. So yeah, I'm working for the Global Evergreening Alliance. I started my new job a week ago. And I have to say, probably just elaborating on what Samira was saying. I mean, I remember when I was younger, I was very much interested in innovation and testing new ideas and piloting new ideas. So this has been probably the first part of my career, really picking up some of the great ideas in kind of different continents and different social areas, and testing whether these ideas could really work for the benefit of the community. And then probably kind of during my career, I just realized that, you know, you need to have the scale to really bring this idea to the next level, which is really kind of scaling up and going to benefit a much kind of larger cohort of people. And this is probably what I've been working on in the last few years. And with the Global Evergreening Alliance, the Global Evergreening Alliance is a very young organization. It was established 2 years ago. We have 40 members, some of the leading international NGOs, some of the leading environmental organization, including where, you know, Trina works. So Trina organization is one of our partners. And what we do is basically we run programs on land regeneration and land restoration in Africa, Australia. We just launched our new partnership in Asia, and we are finalizing Latin America. And probably, I mean, the key message for me is really working under the Millennium Development Goals and now the Sustainable Development Goals. You just realize that partnership and collaboration is really a key element of what we're trying to do.
Federico, I can't wait to hear some of those examples. Now, Trina, we've heard of Samira's childhood dreams. Federico, as a child, was testing out ideas from the very beginning. Did you imagine as a child growing up that you'd move and live in Guam and be working in such an incredibly diverse part of the world in terms of biodiversity as well as cultures?
Thank you, Rosie. That's what I was thinking of when I was listening to Samira and Federico. I wanted to be a marine biologist since I was very, very small. I grew up in a landlocked state in Colorado in the United States, but I watched Jacques Cousteau specials on TV, and I fell in love with the ocean. And so I have been living and working in the Pacific in Guam for 26 years. And just drawn to the, as you said, the incredible biodiversity, the incredible cultural diversity of the islands, and the incredible beauty of the people and the warmth. And in my work with the Nature Conservancy, though, over the years, I started as a scientist, as a marine biologist, but I've seen the threats from things like climate change and pressures from unsustainable development and even more localized threats like overharvest degrade this incredible biodiversity and these globally important natural resources. And it's become, the rates of the degradation have accelerated. And, you know, the Pacific Island communities are often among the most vulnerable to these impacts. And so, you know, recognizing that this decade especially is considered just one of the most critical to stopping this degradation, we've been wrestling with this idea of how do you get meaningful conservation impact at such a vast scale? The Pacific is huge, the islands are spread out, often populations are small. And, you know, so we've been trying to tackle this. We found the size of the problem really requires tackling it in diverse ways. And so listening to my fellow panelists, it's really, you know, diverse partners and collaboration at all scales. We've been working, you know, sort of top down with elected leaders and governments, and they make bold commitments, like, for example, under the SDGs. And then working with local communities and NGO partners to trial some really innovative projects to on the ground at sites, and then, you know, amplify the things that are successful, help share the lessons learned of things that didn't work, and you know, getting that across the region. We found it, the Pacific is incredible in terms of collaboration. There's a real sense in the culture to work together, where we are stronger together. And so there's a lot of existing regional platforms to help amplify messages. We've helped establish peer learning networks across the Pacific. And then, you know, really demonstrating the value of healthy ecosystems has helped us to really drive increased investment, both internally and externally, to help support this work. So that's sort of my work in a nutshell.
Amazing, amazing. And a big shout out to everyone joining from across the Pacific. Now, Ian, Federico said the Global Greening Alliance is a very new organization, 2 years old, but I do believe that your new organization, Respond Global, started in 2020. What a year to start a brand new organization. Tell us more.
Thanks, Rosie, and what a year to start an organization that looks at health emergencies as well. Maybe to start my journey, to pick up on some things that fellow panelists were talking about. I started in the governmental sector. I'm a doctor by background, and I was really interested at the time in supporting mass casualty and disaster response. And so I did a lot of that here, based in Australia to start with at the national level. But to try and achieve scale and impact through the governmental system, that was an interesting sort of a journey for me. And we were certainly from Australia helping Pacific neighbors and into the Asia area. But I took another step and then joined the WHO for about 6 years. So it was a fascinating journey from being a governmental person to the UN system and working in WHO. And we did achieve scale. Impact is another question, but certainly we started with a very small program to look at setting quality and standards for emergency medical response teams that respond to cyclones and tornadoes, earthquakes, and outbreaks of disease at the national level and across and between countries. We grew from something small to 130 countries in about 6 years. So really achieved something. But for me, the question always remained, how much impact was I having at the local level? And I went through a bit of a journey, particularly in the last 2 years. I want to share with people about how the localization agenda and the UN system are being perceived in two different ways. And that's why I took a conscious decision to step out of that multilateral system and set up what Respond Global is, a social enterprise, because I feel that's the next scale and impact that we can achieve. Because for me, the localization agenda and the pressure on the UN at the moment is to appear as the multilateral system to become more localized, whereas from the bottom up, I think everybody wants to talk about how we can manage crises, health emergencies, and other forms of emergencies at the local level, rather than have a discussion through the UN about how they can become more localized. It's an interesting approach to exactly the same word, and that's why I've stepped out. And what we're really hoping to achieve, in this year of COVID, is to support, particularly at the local level, businesses to become more resilient and to get back to work so they can employ people and people can actually have job security. Looking at, particularly on a food SDG, food security. We've been doing a lot of work with meat and fresh produce and other groups to make sure that that's done in a safe way and people can continue working in Bangladesh, looking at how to help the garment industry and others continue. And then from the health side, looking at supporting national medical responses to COVID, and hopefully as soon as COVID starts to wane, looking at that response to their own particular risks in disaster, outbreak, and conflict.
Yeah, as you say, Ian, at this time in 2020, that how important those health responses are, but especially that systems response to it. So I might actually go back to you, Trina, and touch on this idea of localization and then hear from other panelists as well around who is shaping the challenge and thinking about the solution, as Ian was saying, to have that really from a locally led and grounded in the challenge. Because I don't know about you, but in some experience I've seen in Wateraid with toilets that are designed from outside and brought into a community, sometimes they're used as a storage shed because there's not the sort of engagement to check on the design, if it works for people, if it's what they're after. Trina, what have you seen in your experience from that idea of locally led innovation, change and development?
Absolutely, Rosie. The Nature Conservancy, as you said, it's a 70-year organization that had very successful approaches in the United States and North America. But when we came across to it working in the Asia Pacific and especially the Pacific Islands, it became abundantly clear that the best ideas will bubble up from the community and working in an inclusive, participatory way. And we've tried to really ensure gender equity and working with the youth and the elders and really get all the voices to the table that we're seen as sort of a neutral convener, a trusted partner to try to bring people together and try to bring the best available science information, but to learn from the traditional knowledge and to really so like you said, for some examples, we we work with diverse local NGO partners to develop a climate adaptation toolkit. And one of the things that was in the toolkit was helping to figure out a historical timeline and a seasonal calendar. And so really helping to understand what's happened already in Pacific Island life and what were some of the ways they dealt with, disasters in the past or drought or typhoons. And can they take that, those experiences and now apply them to these accelerating climate impacts?
I love that example. Really sounds like it's building on that traditional value of knowledge, but looking how to use the technology of now and into the future to value that and to use it. And Samira, I mean, you touched on this in some of your earlier reflections of how you bring diverse people together, different backgrounds and organizations. Have you got examples like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Often you'll hear sort of Salesforce refer to technology as an equalizer at .org. And, when I started, I didn't think too hard about it. But as I, started digging further and further, I think it can be an equalizer, but it is an equalizer only insofar as you have presence in those communities, you're working closely with those communities, your technology is informed by the data in the local communities, and that is easier said than done. And I think there's a lot of work to be done before technology truly becomes that equalizer, partly due to this data issue and partly due to infrastructure and the digital divide and whatnot. But two sort of key projects or areas that are on my mind right now is one, in the face of sort of this pandemic, I've been thinking a lot about social enterprises. And I think this was mentioned by my fellow panelists as well. All sectors need to be involved. And previously there were more sort of distinct lines between nonprofits and corporations and governments. And I think there's more cross-sector collaboration taking place, and it's crucial. And social enterprises are at the leading edge of understanding communities and providing real-time solutions in a way that makes sense to their specific communities. So how can we as a large technology company support more of that? And how can we bring some of those learnings and that change-making culture back into our ecosystem is on my mind. Again, much easier said than done. Still trying to find a home for it and figure out what that partnership means and at what different levels.
Amazing. And so many different themes that we can keep building on. Ian, Samira touched there on the notion of a social enterprise. Have you got any examples that we could all take and learn from?
Yeah, it's a great point. For us in the world of health response, particularly, when we look at the humanitarian need, a lot of that need is actually currently in conflict zones, etc. If I can paint a picture with my hands, and forgive me if it doesn't come across on the platform, but if there's a 180-degree arc of all the need, you have a section, a wedge of that, which is going to be continuing where one country or group support another through the bilateral between country or regionalized approach. And that's an area of importance, but I'm not sure how much more it can grow. It's got a fixed limit. On the other side, we have to protect that space for NGOs and other groups who can come in. It's a bilateral or local response, as it were, but the NGOs rely on donations from either public or other sectors. I feel, and that's why I've moved into the area of social enterprise, and I'm partnering up with EarthTech based here on the Sunshine Coast, and obviously hosting Together in Action, because that kind of culture coming in from the tech world, from the logistics and business world, married up with health background that some of us bringing together, has been an amazing journey for us. And because in the middle of that unmet need, I just feel that social enterprise can grow and meet the need. If it's in some way pays for itself and doesn't have to always be donor-led, as in you have to pay me, my hand is out, you have to donate to me, and then I'll do something. Instead, I can, at the local level particularly, do something that covers the cost of me doing that, but I want to do it because it's socially good. That is exponentially able to grow. Because those other two wedges, yeah, we don't see them grow to meet the need. And that's why I think I've taken that step to get into social enterprise. I'm really excited about that area. I just feel that that's the future for us. It's a hybrid, I suppose, of the best of, I hope, NGO and business.
Yeah, I love the way you drew that, of bringing those different elements together. And Federico, what about you? What are your reflections as well in terms of what are some of the things that can really drive that exponential impact of the culture and the people, and how we work together to do that?
Okay, I think that as an international community, probably we need to be very honest and blame ourselves. Because in the last 30 years, I think we have given very confusing messages to local communities. I remember, back in the 90s, there was this decentralization agenda trend where some of the big donors were saying, okay, now we want to localize. I remember the European Union, the American Agency for Development, USAID. So they start decentralizing a lot, and then all of a sudden they realize, it's not really going to work. And so they centralize again. I think some of the UN agencies made exactly the same mistake. From a community point of view, this is really confusing. And then, in 2000, the Millennium Development Goals were basically, we were saying, this doesn't really apply to, let's say, Western countries. It just applies to kind of, developing countries in a way. So people living in those countries were saying, okay, so we are the only one that are actually pushed to kind of contribute to a better world and to a better planet. And then, luckily enough, this has been fixed through the SDGs, because the SDGs apply to everybody. And I guess, the big challenge, in my opinion, and we experience this every time we go and talk to a smallholder farmer in any community where we work. When you go and talk to these people, for them, it is, they need to improve their food security, they need to improve their livelihoods, they need to have better and more climate change resilient agriculture. They also are interested in kind of looking at possibilities for renewable energies. So from our standpoint of view, sometimes we think about this segmentation. So I'm going to work on food security, I'm going to work on climate change, I'm going to work on this and that. But, at the end of all this chain, you have a human being, you have a person, and this person has, very diverse needs. And this applies to all of us in our normal life. And this is where I think this is the opportunity. I mean, in the next decade, this is really the opportunity to change the narrative. And I fully agree with Ian about social enterprise. Social enterprise has always been a sector that has been neglected in any of the kind of international development conversation, because it was always considered kind of mixed business thing, so not really relevant to international development. And that's why I think the Together in Action Summit, what EarthTech is doing, giving opportunities to social entrepreneurs from around the world, to be given the opportunity to connect with potential investors and donors, it is so commendable, because this has always been a missing piece in all the work we have been doing over the years.
Thanks, Federico. And thanks to all of our amazing panelists as we sit here in 2020 and look at the challenges that we've got ahead of us. You've really helped us understand the work that you're all doing in your very different contexts, but some really strong themes about the power of collaboration and how we can absolutely solve these challenges by coming together and approaching them in new ways and unlocking that new power and the power of individuals, as we heard about so strongly. So thank you all so much. Go well.